Hi folks, this is Craig Sirianni, owner and operator of Craig Sirianni Vocal Studios here in New York. This is video number 2 in revealing the secrets of the LoMonaco technique. This one is on breathing. Before we get started, I want to thank everybody for all the wonderful response from the first video. Thank you, it was very encouraging. Now it occurred to me after I made that last video that I didn't talk too much about Tom LoMonaco, in case there are some singers who don't know who he was, or the students that he trained. And yes, by the way, if it looks like I'm reading off of notes as I'm doing this, I am. There's way too much information here to disseminate to try and memorize it all, so I'm reading off of bullet points. So bear with me. There's a lot here to go over. It occurred to me after the last video that I need to talk a little bit about Tom and about the students he trained. Tom grew up in Brooklyn. He grew up with his brother Jerry. They were both fabulous singers, fabulous teachers. If you haven't looked them up on YouTube, you're in for a treat. You've got to watch these guys sing. Now, some of the singers that Tommy has trained, one of the names you've probably come across more often than not on YouTube is Jerry Hadley. Jerry Hadley was probably one of Tom's most famous singers. He achieved some wonderful things in his career. He was a wonderful recording artist, a fabulous singer. And by the way, Jerry Hadley was instrumental in introducing me to Tom LoMonaco and getting me into the LoMonaco studio. So I will forever be grateful for that. When I joined the studio, Tommy had many tenors who were all singing at the Metropolitan Opera. There was Jerry Hadley. There was Neil Wilson. There was Keith Olsen. Okay, these guys, I idolized all of them. And they were all singing at the Met. If you have not seen them, again, they're all on YouTube. Take a look. Tom's teacher was Dr. Douglas Stanley. He wrote a book called Your Voice back in the 40s. I think you can still get it on Amazon, I'm not sure. Douglas Stanley was a surgeon and a vocal instructor. So nobody knew the anatomy more intimately than he did. And that's what he passed along to Tom, and then Tom passed it along to us. Now, Tom's technique, and again, it's Tom's technique. This is not my technique. I didn't have any technique when I went to see Tom. I want to make that clear. Tom's technique is a very rigorous, exacting technique. Okay, folks, it's based on very, very low, first of all, very low belly breathing. Okay, now you'll get a different answer for breathing from every vocal teacher, vocal instructor that you speak to. But Tom's was very low belly breathing. This was the breathing he used. This was the breathing that I used for the 25 years I was on stage. But the other aspects of the technique that we'll get to eventually in these videos, this one is on breathing, okay? If I hadn't mentioned that already, there is also proper jaw placement, proper tongue placement, and of course, very low laryngeal placement. And this all adds up to producing that big, round, ever-elusive, released, pharyngally dominated sound that so many tenors hear and love and are looking for, but don't know where to look. Now, how is this different than the usual aspects of vocal instruction that other teachers will offer you? It is radically different. Okay, I can't stress that enough. It's radically different. Very often if we go, say we weren't working with a teacher, very often if we go with instinct, your brain will frequently suggest the exact opposite of what the correct vocal technique is for a particular application. So we can't really rely on flying by the seat of our pants. Real technique needs to be shown and demonstrated by somebody who's done it for a living. Now, in my opinion, Tom's technique and his teaching was genius. Now, I know everybody thinks their voice teacher is the best teacher in the world, but the reason that I felt that Tom's teaching was so genius was because Tom made, and he was the only teacher I knew that was able to really do this, Tom made vocal technique into a series of physical gestures. Now, why is that important? Because making the art of singing into physical gestures makes it repeatable and it makes it controllable. It's a physical gesture. Once you learn it, you can go back to it again. Okay? As opposed to the teachers out there that are trying to teach or work with imagery. Now, I'm a big proponent on if this works for you, go for it. It's fine. Okay? If imagery works for you, great, wonderful. I wish it did for me. But I'll be honest with you. The thought of walking out in front of 2,000 people for the first time and wondering what orifice that rainbow was supposed to shoot out of my body so that I could get that high B flat, that was not for me. Okay? I needed something more than that, something I could rely on, something that I could depend on. And that was Tom's technique. The physicality of Tom's technique also lends to consistency and credibility. One of the best compliments I would get throughout my vocal career was my voice was very consistent all the time. And I owe that to Tom's technique. Now, it's consistent and reliable, especially when we need it most. When do we need it most? Under the pressure of live stage performance, when everybody is about as nervous as you're going to get. Okay? It's a wonderful feeling to be able to know that you can rely on a technique that's going to be there for you every single time. And that's what Tom had to offer. And that's why I'm so excited about trying to disseminate this information to you. There is a huge misconception out there regarding how much work or if singing should be any work at all. Okay? Here's the answer, folks. It's an enormous amount of work. Okay? Ask any real professional tenor who's singing out there if he's working on stage and if he's tired when the show is over. You'll have your answer. Please do not buy into the lie or the myth that was perpetuated, I don't know by who, at some point in time, where you just simply stand here, very politely and, smile, and Puccini and Verdi comes flying out. It does not work that way. Voice has to be built one step at a time. That idea is total nonsense. It doesn't work that way. Try it, but you'll be disappointed. Now on to today's topic, breathing. Okay? I can't stress enough how important breathing is, and any good vocal teacher will tell you the same thing. The singer who has complete control of their breathing runs the show, okay? And everything else lines up accordingly. If your breath is not correct, nothing else will be. Now, Tom's position on breathing and what I used throughout my career was very, very low belly breathing. Okay, he wanted this down here, fully distended and fully inflated and expanded. Okay, so in order to get that to happen very frequently early on in the training, he would encourage me to collapse my chest, cave in a little bit. Now, obviously, he didn't want me to sing like that on stage. It was for the training purposes. But if you collapse your chest, the breath only has one place to go, and that's straight down. Okay, so when I take that kind of breath, I used to be bigger than I am now, but when I take that kind of breath, watch my hands, folks. So here's my abdomen just kind of at rest. There. Now that's a fully distended, for me, right now, abdomen, but notice it's still there, and I'm still talking to you. That's step 2. So the first step with any student it's relatively easy to show them how to get the breath low. And by the way, I'm showing you what happens in the front because it's easier to see, but in reality, this is happening all around. If I cinch my waist, that opens up as well. It's like an inner tube around this section. Tom advocated much lower belly breathing. As I've begun teaching more and more, I'm finding that sometimes I will also rely on the epigastric area for leaning out and for support as well, but I'll get to that. Now, when you're that inflated and that distended, of course, the whole idea is to get the diaphragm pushed down flat. That's what does it. Your lungs billow out down here. That's why breathing up here will avail you nothing. Now again, if that works for you and you're a great opera singer, go ahead and use it. That's fine. But if it doesn't work for you, then you'll want to learn about this. Now, we've gotten the breath low. Okay, that's step one. Step two, once you've gotten that breath low and you've expanded that position, front, sides, some women even get their back involved, which is an amazing thing to see. Once you get open like that, step two, holding that position. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's the hard part. That's the part that takes time, patience, and physical development. Okay? Because the idea is you have to hold that position while you're singing. You cannot just take a breath low and then let it all collapse and start singing a phrase. You'll have no support. You'll have nothing down here. You won't have a breath supply. Now, step three in the breathing. Once that inflation happens, and I can go into much more detail about this, via a Skype lesson, obviously. I want to try to make these videos on the shorter side to be able to hit more bullet points. Step three, also one of the harder steps, is appoggio. Appoggiare in Italian. It means to lean. We're literally leaning down here, leaning out against this inflated position. But if you're not inflated already, you've got nothing to lean against. So that's why I'm doing this in a stepwise kind of a delivery. Now, why do we want appoggio? Why do we want to lean out against this a little bit? When we want a higher note, a louder note, a longer note, we need to be able to lean against that. So you can still inflate, and then when you're singing along into the aria, and the high note comes at the end, there, I leaned out even more. Now that's a muscular movement. That's not a breath movement. I didn't take any more breath in to do that. I'm already tanked up as far as breath goes. But I'm going to lean out a little bit on that, okay, for the extra support it takes, for the extra pressure, for the high note, or for the longer note, or for the louder note. All right, let's follow these bullet points along. Now, this idea of holding open the position leads me into one of Tom's other favorite sayings. He had a million of them, and they were all correct. And I'll probably pull out several of them as the video series unfolds. But when I first joined the studio, I was young and ambitious. I wanted to, kill it and make the biggest sound I could. And very frequently, I would hear from Tom, "Lad," he called everybody lad. "Lad, you're driving the sound. Don't drive the sound. Hold the sound open." I can't stress this enough, folks. This is very, very important. You will actually get diminishing returns if you try forcing the sound, if you try pushing the sound. It will never be as loud, as full and round, as if in this held open, expanded position, low diaphragm, belly expanded, sides expanded, you will never get the same kind of sound if that doesn't happen at all. Now, this expanded position is what has to happen all the time. This doesn't go away. Okay, and that's the other hard part about, well, are we really working when we're singing? Yes, we are, because it takes a tremendous amount of work once you inflate this position to hold it. And you need to hold it the whole time you're singing. It doesn't ever stop. Doesn't ever stop. And this requires time, practice, in order to get this muscle development. All right. We talked about the appoggio already. Also, by striving to stay held open like this means that when it comes time to take another breath, you're already open down here. The breath will fly right down where it needs to, even if it's just a catch breath. Sometimes, very often, it's just that. You only have time to grab a catch breath. By staying open, your breath will know right where to go. There's something else that comes to mind, and that is timing the breath. Okay? Now, here's the idea behind that. When you say you're about to sing an aria, and the pianist starts, your accompanist starts to play, and you know where your entrance is, you try to time the breath so that as you're inflating low and expanding out, you immediately turn the breath around and time it so that as soon as you've taken as much breath as you can, you begin singing your first note. In other words, the breath goes in, turns right around, goes back out again without stopping. Okay, that's the key. Because while we're singing, if we ever stop the breath or hold the breath, our chords go like that. That's called the Valsalva maneuver. Or, in layman's terms, a glottal hit, okay, a glottal stop. The whole idea behind this technique is to keep the throat open along with the breathing, and that kind of glottal stop is will completely mess up any opportunity of keeping the consistency of the throat open and the breath flowing smoothly. So the breath doesn't ever stop, folks. Doesn't stop. It always stays moving. Now, of course, there is an exercise that I can show you to facilitate this type of breath development. It would take, a little bit extra time, but again, it's the first thing I show all of my prospective Skype students or students in person. We go through the breathing before we do anything else, and I can demonstrate this in much more detail and show how it affects notes, high notes, low notes, in greater detail in a Skype lesson or in an in-person lesson, of course. Okay, we've talked about timing the breath, about the glottal stop, the Valsalva. Now make no mistake, folks, this is an extreme breathing technique. It doesn't really feel very gentle, okay? But when you're making a sound to fill a hall of 2,000 people, sometimes more, gentle's not the way to go. It's not going to work, okay? Now this takes a bit of time and effort to develop. Tom had very many professional tenors who had the potential to go on, but only a few were willing to hang in there and put in the time and effort it took to develop this kind of breathing. I was one. You could be the next one. Tom always warned us, if you want to be able to produce this type of sound, this big, round pharyngeal sound, there is no easier, softer way to go about this technique. There just isn't. Now, furthermore, speaking of breath, in the initial part of the training with Tom, now Tom would work on phrases, but very often he would have us take many extra or, unmarked breaths that weren't supposed to be in the phrase. He'd add them in on purpose. And here's why. If you sang a phrase for Tom and you did not give Tom his sound that he was looking for, then it didn't matter if you added 5 breaths in that phrase. He wanted his sound. And if you had to breathe before every single note to get that phrase to work correctly, that's what he made you do. Because eventually you get strong enough, those breaths would disappear. So, it's all about the sound. It was always about the sound with Tom, and Tom would not accept any less than the sound that he wanted. So, as many times as I needed to breathe, even for a short phrase, that's what we had to do. Maintaining Tom's sound, even with having to take several extra breaths in order to be able to do that, always trumped the idea of trying to get, say, like, let's do an aria from beginning to end, compromising the entire way. Again, that will avail you nothing. The hard work, the heavy lifting, is learning each phrase with Tom's sound and Tom's technique, one phrase at a time. That's the heavy lifting, folks. Once you do that, stringing the aria all together at the end, that's easier than you think because you've already done all the hard work. But the people who keep running arias beginning to end, beginning to end, beginning to end, thinking that someday they'll get strong enough and the high note will get better, I wish I could say that were the case, but very often it is not. As we move more and more, folks, toward instant gratification in our culture today, fewer and fewer people seem to be willing to devote the time and effort that this technique requires. If you are one of those tenors who is willing to do that, you can call me, you can text me, you can email me about Skype lessons or coming here in person if you'd like to. If you have not done so, please remember to like, and if you have not done so, please remember to subscribe to the video series. All of the other aspects of the LoMonaco technique that I mentioned before, we will be getting to in subsequent videos, like jaw placement, tongue placement, how to modify vowels, head position, all those things. We'll be getting to them. But thank you again for all of your wonderful feedback and for watching the first video. And until the next video, ciao.